I'd like to start on my right with Dr. Richard Barbrook. Richard is the organiser and the founder of the Cyber Salon, which,
That's a long time, yeah.
well, I've done some very last minute homework, which advised on Labour's digital manifesto, and he's here today to talk about games for the many, which is a concept I know nothing about, and I'm really excited to hear about that. Here we have Kim Fernley. Kim is the organiser of the Campfire Beacon in Bournemouth. She's a traveller, a writer, a dancer and a healer, and the words that Kim uses herself about her life and I think of when I think of her is fearlessness and freedom.
Thank you.
On my left, Ed Dowding. I saw from your blog that you're a venture communist. I like that idea. I like the sound of that. And a wannabe benign dictator. So I'm definitely interested in that because I have a cat at home who's one of those. Ed runs the democracy platform represent.me, which I'm sure many people will have come across. And when I had a look at that, and I've been, at election times, I've been engaged in that. What struck me about that is that the really clear and understandable look at data that you can find when you go there. And then last but absolutely not least, on the far left here is Indra Adnan. There you go. Honestly, metaphors. From the Alternative UK. Indra is a writer and advocate. She's really interested in balanced leadership, and she's been involved in work which I'm very interested in personally, which is about reimagining public services as well as the political arena. So these are our guests. I feel an absolute sense of impostership and humility and honour to be sat on this panel, and I'm going to come to you first, Richard.
You left a few things out.
Sure.
I teach politics at the University of Westminster. I've also just started a job at the Labour Leadership Office as their digital democracy and games strategist. I've also published a number of books about the internet and gaming. I was under the assumption that I was here because it says, is the existing political party duopoly past its sell-by date, and is it time to sweep it aside and usher in a new way of doing politics? To which I would say, actually, those two things are not irreconcilable. In fact, actually, I would argue that the rebuilding or the re-emergence of a duopoly has actually been about a new way of doing politics. I know it's a very contradictory thing. I should explain. I don't know whether people saw the Guardian newspaper. People don't read it anymore since it's veered even more to the right. But they did actually have quite an interesting article, which is about what the hard left did before Jeremy got elected leader. To explain, I always feel this place. It's not just that Pete did build Big Chill here many years ago, but before that it was a favoured venue of the GLC left, Greater London Council. The hard left ran the council here in London between 1981 and 1986, and we did try to experiment with a new way of doing politics, and this was suppressed and written out of history. I mean, it's interesting the Guardians finally realised that they were part of this conspiracy. So what we were trying to do then was actually to unite people in their diversity. So it's not identity politics, but it was the reverse. It's about actually trying to overcome homophobia, sexism, racism, disableism, to unite the class. And then if you make people feel powerful, they can run themselves. And it's the idea that it's not just electing a few representatives who do things on your behalf, like some sort of feudal lord. It's actually getting people, empowering people to make their own decisions. So it's political, but it's also economic and social. So one of the key things, obviously, I was involved in this GLC in a group called Labour Briefing, which is a sort of faction behind the GLC. And one of the key things we wanted to do is set up cooperatives to move away from the idea of socialism as top-down statism, state capitalism, to use the jargon term, and to actually move towards a more cooperative way of doing it. In fact, to go back in many ways to what socialism was in the late 19th and early 20th century, before the Russian Revolution and the First World War, where people wanted to build the cooperative commonwealth. So this sort of tradition, if you like, got marginalised. First, as I said, in the two world wars and the building of the welfare state, which obviously had great achievements for people, but it actually also in some ways disempowered them, because though it gave them welfare services, it didn't actually give them the power to run society themselves. It was a bureaucracy doing it on their behalf. And particularly as we now see under neoliberalism, which followed it, it said, oh, we're going to empower the individual, but actually, as we've seen, the bureaucracies have got even bigger and even more unaccountable. And I think part of what's happened in the last few years is an understanding that it is important to do initiatives like this, local initiatives, community initiatives, but you have to, at some point, tackle the problem of how do you take power within this society to redistribute it. Because if you're not engaged with the struggle to win local elections and general elections, and I assume at some point European and federal elections, we're in problems. Because as long as we're in small groups, they've divided and ruled us. It's the oldest. Tacitus talks about this as the way the Roman Empire operated. Our rulers have been trained in the classics, or certainly their predecessor, and they know to divide and rule us. So one of the things we need to do is to come together. And the Labour Party was founded in the late 19th and early 20th century, not as an ideology party, not like Socialist Worker where they sell you the party line, but actually as a class party, to unite people in their diversity, and to be, if you like, a site of struggle. This is why the Labour Party loves having factional arguments, because that's the way it's supposed to operate. From everyone from liberals on the right to socialists or communists on the left. I think what the project is not just simply to replace, to replace Blairites with hard left MPs or councillors or now the leadership, of course. That's okay, that might be important, but it's also to bring people on board. I mean, people who we don't necessarily politically agree with on everything, like Barry Gardner, and yet he's was a valuable member of the election team, to actually try and unite the party, to bring the so-called centrists on board to the Corbyn project. But it's to do more than that. It's actually to create a way of, when you come to power, is actually being able to then redistribute that power. So one of the things I've been involved with, and this is sort of, I thought Ed's going to also talk about this, is that one of the things that we want to do is actually try and use ideas which have been done abroad, like in Brazil and elsewhere, and Barcelona and places like that, participatory budgeting, getting people to decide, actually take part in the budgeting of their local councils, to get Labour Party members to decide what the manifesto is. The guy I'm working with closely, John McDonnell, he said he would really like it, if possible, assuming the Tory party doesn't collapse, government doesn't collapse within the next 12 months, is to actually crowdsource the next Labour Party manifesto, get the members. We now have 550,000 members. It's the largest political party in Europe, and we're still growing. Please join if you haven't already joined. Is to actually get them to crowdsource the manifesto in public meetings, in real life conversations, but also to use these new digital tools. So those people who have disabilities or childcare or just have very, very busy lives with their jobs can actually also participate in contributing their ideas. And also, the other thing, which I'm going to have to rush off at some point today, because there's also, one of the other things we're interested in is actually advancing the cause of human rights. We're proposing to, this is part of this digital democracy manifesto you talked about that I coordinated for Jeremy's last leadership campaign, was a pledge to have a People's Charter of Digital Liberties. I'm going to go to the Open Rights Group meeting later on today, where they're talking about these problems. We have this amazing technology which allows us to share information, overcome the spectacle, as we old situationists would say, the mainstream media's lies, essentially, about the left. But of course, it's also a method of surveillance, of control, and increasingly of censorship, as we now see with Facebook and Google. So one of the things we need to do is think about how do we renegotiate this relationship with our these digital network technologies. But again, it's not just a question of a group of experts sitting in a small group saying, well, we know what to do. It's actually going out and asking people what they think their rights are, and then they're quite surprised they're not, and asking how can we articulate that and make them take technological form. And lastly, I mean, I see I was down here for Games for the Many. This is the other part of my existence is in the election campaign, we were going to run an experiment using these various different software just before the election, and it got called off. And I was asked whether we could do something else for the election campaign. So I suggested that we did a game, an app game. It's called Corbyn Run, if you've not seen it. So this is inspired by Jean-Luc Mélenchon's presidential campaign in France, where he made a game. We made it as an app game, got rid of the violence, and it was amazingly successful. We got 650,000 downloads and 2 million impressions. It's certainly the most successful thing I've ever been involved with. And what was interesting, I found when I went to Labour conference this year, is a number of people who said, well, they really like the game as a game, which, given it was made in 3.5 weeks, I think it's quite good. My 4-year-old loves the game, so that's always a good sign. If he likes it, it must be good. But it was actually, they thought it was a symbol of the Labour Party doing something different, of actually engaging with the sort of culture that people really have. And so, you know, because instead of having this, again, this sort of Blairite, top-down spin, focus groups, you know, you just let a group of people go out and make a game. We got some money from the Labour Party for doing it. There were other people like this guy up in Scotland, Bonnie Prince Bob, who did a half-hour science fiction movie about Jeremy Corbyn's government. There was a guy called Nasser Razak who just shared lots of memes, Labour's Digital Army. There were lots of these grassroots initiatives which basically hacked the Facebook algorithm. You know, the Tories had hired Cambridge Analytica and all this, did huge amounts of top-down advertising, but what they couldn't get away from is people sharing this stuff between them. And this was worth more than any advertising. I mean, the Labour Party did spend some money on advertising, but actually it was this sort of spontaneous sharing of Labour Party propaganda, which was so successful. I have an ex-student who is a card-carrying member of the Conservative Party who complained that her entire Facebook feed was nothing but pro-Labour postings. And she's a Tory, yes. So God knows what it was like for the rest of the population who were not. You know. So that showed you one of the interesting things that's going on, and really what the Labour Party's got to build on. It can't just, as I said, be the replacement of one group of politicians by another group of politicians. It's got to harness this spontaneous belief that we can actually make things better, and to actually give power to people. So I'm doing some other stuff, you know, very technical. You know, I'm working with the Treasury team, doing games for them. Where they might have seen some of the publicity about this, because John McDonnell said we are wargaming when we go into government. Well, this is what, you know, so we get, you know, a group of people who are going to be running the Treasury in 18 months, and we go through various scenarios with them and put them under pressure. There's that sort of thing. We're also going to work with Labour activists to think about what's it going to be like when you put a left-wing government into power. I mean, us oldies have had experience because we went through the GLC experience. The younger ones, I noticed, were actually a few months ago, were actually really freaked out by the hostile press coverage. I said, you should have been there in the 1980s, where we were all IRA-loving paedophiles and all the rest of this nonsense. So we're going to do some games with them. They're what are called mega games. You get 40, 50 people together in a room with Labour Party members, and you game through ideas. We're going to base it on the 1980s novel and TV series called A Very British Coup. If only so we can theme it in a 1980s style. So we've got lots of people, women in tight jeans and white socks and black pumps, as I remember, is in the DVD, and reminded me of somebody I was very fond of at the time. So there's that. And also, obviously, we're going to do more app games. We're doing some games jams, and one of the interesting things we're doing is not just doing the games as propaganda, but also to try and get them to connect people together. So, for instance, on things like canvassing, you meet a group of people. What an amazing experience during the election is actually I had people who never voted Labour, let alone joined Labour, actually went canvassing for the first time. A friend of mine was on a canvass in South Croydon, which we won, where 150 people turned up. Normally, you're lucky if you get 5 or 10. Yeah, so this was incredibly large. Not surprisingly, they won the seat. But the thing is, you get this very intense experience, but you never get to stay in contact. So it's sort of gamified camps. So just as I think, I probably had my 10 minutes of fame, haven't I? Okay, I just want to say, so I said the two things I'm involved with is digital democracy, trying to get the membership and then hopefully supporters, trade unionists, and then eventually, hopefully the entire population involved in actually administering the state, bringing the state back under the control of the people. And we know when we say for the few, for the many, not the few, it's not replacing one few with another few. It really means the many doing it. And so to use the old techniques we've developed over hundreds of years, but also to supplement them with these new digital technologies, to use them to include more people, not to. And secondly, with the gamification side of it, is to actually engage in these new types of culture, to use them and mobilise them to spread Labour's message, but also to again empower people, to make them feel confident that they're able to take part in running the state at a top level, but also as party members, that they're continually engaged. You know, you don't want to be. I had friends in America who were in the Obama campaign, and as soon as Obama got elected, that was it. They never heard anything more from until the next time. Well, we need to go beyond that. We need to have it so that we're all engaged in this project of transformation. And it's important to see state power, but it's not an end in itself.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I'm having a bit of a fangirl thing here. That was brilliant, thank you. Kim, over to you.
Hi. Well, I'm less of a fire starter and more really of a flamethrower, I think. And I think we need a more of a flame-throwing approach to politics. I was a journalist in years gone by and no longer work in the media. But I do dream, I meditate, I do a lot of yoga. And I think that the way politics are at the moment doesn't work at all. I think we just get more of what we've had. Each time you get one party in, we get a lot of promises. We get another party in, we don't like them, and we keep getting the same thing, and we have this two-party house. And I think that we need a completely new approach. And I have this dream where if we had a system where we identified the people in our communities who are doing really good things already. So we all know the people who have fought for a school, or who have fought to keep open a hospital, or who have done some wonderful things in the community with the environment. There are so many amazing people in the community, and we've recently set up the Bournemouth Beacon, and have been with my friend Claire over there, and Kate, who's gone to listen to the other group. And we've been amazed. All we did was set it up as a supper club. Claire's a vegan, and we decided to set it up with a vegan and vegetarian theme. And through that, we've had almost 200 people inquire just from putting out a few posts and an article in the local paper. But what struck me about these people was they were already engaged or wanting to be engaged in helping other people in the community, be it with the homeless, or with the food kitchens, or working with permaculture. We've been up to the university, and there's some amazing young people at the university this weekend, on Wednesday, already engaged in some wonderful stuff, and they're heartfelt, and they're wanting to make an impression. So I believe if we identified the people who exist currently in our communities, and we got behind them by way of some national movement, and we funded them to use the existing system to stand as members of parliament in their area as independents. So it doesn't matter whether they're Labour, whether they're Conservative, all we want is that they are good people wanting to do good for their communities and in their areas and for the world at large. Because I think a lot of the politicians we have, and I don't mean all of them, but a huge amount of them go into this business now less about wanting to change things, and a huge amount of them are about themselves and they're career politicians, where before they used to be there on a platform for something that inspired them, something that made them want to make a difference. So for me, I dream of this network of people in each community who receive, doesn't cost a huge amount to get elected, and they stand for, they're identified and they're supported by a larger network, maybe through Campfire, maybe through something else, and they are encouraged to stand for their constituency. If you imagine you had every single constituency with an independent candidate, we'd have a very different House of Commons. First of all, we'd have to get rid of the two-party side. You'd have to have a round table. And when you get in there, you think about, well, how would you vote for policies? You look at the problems. You would, I imagine it as you would have, you'd put your hand up, what do we vote, what do we want to do with this? We want more funding for hospitals, everybody put your hand up, how much we're going to give. Like going back to that original democracy where democracy started, where everybody had a proper vote. And I think that if we could somehow have this system, you would have, so say someone's got to go off to Russia. Now, I used to think that politics, everybody in politics is highly educated and experienced in the roles that they take. But you can be in charge of the environment and last week you're in charge of the Treasury. And so what I have been very inspired by is by Donald Trump being elected. Because I think that what that tells us is actually anybody can be elected. You, me, anybody could be elected. If he can, so can anybody. We don't have to be affiliated with a party or be a career politician. And so I would like to see the galvanizing of people in their own communities, getting behind somebody who is doing good, has a good heart, get behind them, support them, get a whole house full of independents. And when we've got to go off to see Putin, put our hands up, who wants to go and see Putin? And 4 or 5 people say, oh, I speak Russian, or I know somebody, let's go and sit around the table. And the other side of it, because from where I'm sitting, it's not a lot more complicated than that. There are people going off to these meetings who have absolutely no idea how to behave, have no experience in any of these things, and everybody's out for themselves, and nobody wants to tell the truth, or they've got the whips telling them how to vote, which I don't think is democratic at all. I think you get voted at a local level, and if you believe in something, you should put your hand up and believe in it. And it seems that you get in there and you put your hand up because you've been told if you don't, you won't get funding for this, or we won't support you in that. That to me is not democracy. So for me, I'm done with both parties and all parties. And I think we should have a house full of independents. And I'm for a revolution, not a slow-burning campaign.
Thank you. Brilliant. My mind is buzzing. Ed, over to you.
Hello, good morning everybody. Thank you, Rich and Kim as well, for laying out so many ideas in there to build upon already. Whose hands up if you know what represent me is, if you've heard of represent? Okay, about 25% maybe. So quick summary. It's kind of trying to do what Kim was talking about. It's saying it was. So firstly, let's back up a little bit. Right now, I'm no longer really doing represent. I'm trying to pivot it into something else because I've come to the conclusion that what I'm about to say doesn't actually work. So, or it's not that it doesn't necessarily work. It doesn't work yet. It doesn't work in the way I expected it to. And so what we were trying to do was basically build on the petitions idea, but add a disagree button. Add multiple choice questions. Make it so that you build up your own profile. And don't just sit on that data and monetize it like Change.org and 38 Degrees do. Present it. Make maps, show demographics, pull in census data, show how representative it is. Send that data to MPs, make it open to everybody, to local authorities, so that everyone who needs to act on that data, your desire about how the world can be, can act on it. And as Richard kindly said, we have these beautiful maps that you can zoom right in on down to ward level, see who's engaged at each ward level, see who wants what, where, how that correlates with other things. And it does a number of useful roles. You can, for example, say, okay, show me London, show me transport topics, sort by consensus. That's TfL's to-do list. And show me the ones that are representative. There we go, that's a much better version of TfL's to-do list. And it also allows you to say, well, hang on a second, let's look at these 2-3 issues. what you would sort of want is that often we ask for the moon on a stick. We say, I want an amazing NHS, an amazing education system, and I want low taxes. Like, not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. So we can hold that mirror up to ourselves and go, are we a responsible civic yet? How many of us are asking for this and this, knowing that that is impossible? Or not knowing that that's impossible, because actually often we just haven't thought this shit through. We don't understand the trade-offs, or we're being asked to make trade-offs, and in fact not introducing this third option that perhaps catalyzes a change in the other two. And so we're being asked essentially stupid, simple binary questions that don't allow us to fully express ourselves with the granularity and the responsibility that we want. So the referendum, we all look stupid in that because we're all galvanized into black or white, and we know it's not like that. So represent is there to bring in more shades of grey, more colours of the rainbow, and to bring better information into decisions. We then, being a sort of super ambitious, naive startup, added on this whole chunk around something called liquid democracy. Who knows what liquid democracy is? So liquid democracy is much more what Kim was just talking about, the idea that you pick your own representatives. So what we were saying was ask a series of questions, and if you can say, take all the issues going through the House of Commons, you can sort of simplify down the bill points and say, hey, people, what do you think about these issues? You can vote. You can then compare your vote to your MP's vote. You can then say, okay, so if your MP is your default representative, after a while you can go, okay, so you disagree with your MP 90% of the time on health and 85% of the time on transport. Would you like to pick another representative for those topics? And so you can reconfigure your representation system, which means that you create a trust network. You give your vote to people that you trust on different topics. That trust then cascades upwards because they can give their vote to someone else that they trust more on that topic, and so on and so on. And when those people vote and say, I'm voting this way because of, this implication of this bill, this clause, whatever, information flows back down the system and everyone gets notified about how they voted. So it restores trust and purpose and information, and which builds upon itself into an otherwise massively distrusted, quite dysfunctional system. And so that was the idea. Why we're stopping that is because politics, the Westminster, basically doesn't really want it. We've spoken to a lot of people, a lot of parties, a lot of individual politicians, a lot of groups, and they're, for one reason or another, and some of them really good reasons, aren't actually that interested in knowing what their members think in as much detail. Or at least they're interested in knowing what they think, but they aren't interested in that information being public. And part of our deal was that no, that information kind of has to be public, otherwise it sort of defeats the point. Like, this is a civic engaged thing. And so, but it's totally understandable because they have their own missions. Right? It makes Momentum's life considerably easier if they can say, we're all behind Jeremy Corbyn. If they discover they're not all behind Jeremy Corbyn, or they all have different opinions about things, all hell breaks loose. The Daily Mail dive in there, they all start fighting amongst themselves, and then suddenly it's every sheet's to the wind and it's gone. And that's a bad thing when you're trying to organise people and get people to go in this direction, because we just need to play the game as the rules are written at the moment, because otherwise we're not going to get elected, we're not going to change anything. So it makes sense. Unfortunately, it sort of entirely fucks over our business model and what we were trying to do, and our engagement mechanisms. So what we're doing now is pulling back and going, okay, what is the core bit that we do? And the core bit that we do is find out what people think and make that available. And so let's park politics. Let's park Westminster. That's frankly not going to evolve very quickly. It's certainly not going to evolve much in the next 3 years, because they're all going to be farting around with all sorts of other things. That said, there may be all sorts of catastrophic events or massively disruptive events that happen in the next few years, but whatever, those wildcards that can happen. So, park politics, focus on being a census of our values. And so the census happens every 10 years, it's quantitative, it informs an awful lot of decisions, and it's a massively useful document that an awful lot of money, essentially, is allocated based on. We don't have the same thing for values. We have something called the British Cultural Values Survey. We have a social attitude survey. But what they do is they go to a small number of people, and they do that, well, we've got 1,000 of the right people who are representative in the country, therefore that is how the country thinks. What we're doing is saying, let's merge the petition idea, let's get 100,000 people, 200,000, 500,000, 1 million, 5 million people to do this. And then we don't just inform decisions, we drive actions. Because we can say, hey, 5 million people, what do you think about this? And this? Okay. Then we pull out these clusters and we can aggregate and group and go, so you guys basically want sustainable transport. Here are 3 things that you can go and do on sustainable transport. If you guys want sustainable, green energy, here are some things that you can go and do, and so on and so on. And so you give people actions to organise around. You send the political signal to MPs. That signal still goes out, we just don't worry about engaging them too much and trying to help them to engage with us. Chiefly, we send the signal to local authorities as well, though, where action happens on the ground, where demand and supply is met and measured out. It then also helps us identify who are the most engaged people who want to participate more often and have more say over things. So what we're trying to do is kick off something probably from early next year, January, in order to try and get 2 cycles out before the second anniversary of the referendum. And so do 13 topics in 13 weeks and engage everybody that way. I will probably wrap up there. So what I'm looking for, I'll be posting it on the Campfire network as well and sharing out a link and things, but it'd be great if we can build up a bit of an ambassador network.
Fantastic, wow, that's brilliant. How good is all of this? This is just brilliant, isn't it? I hope you are as awestruck as me, Indra.
Yeah, I am as well. I mean, I'm feeling that everything that's being said is a building conversation, and it's all part of a tapestry, if you like, or a big jigsaw puzzle that we're trying to put together right now. So just to give you a little bit more about myself and my background, I am a journalist, yes. My subject has been, over the past 20 years or so, conflict transformation and soft power. So I'm interested in international relations, but I'm also interested in dynamics between people. I'm a psychotherapist, so I do engage with people on a one-to-one basis and look at the evidence that we have of the pathologies that we're facing, but also I'm a psychosocial therapist, so I'm very conscious of the pathologies of our society as much as of the individuals. I've been a political activist for a good 20 years. I was a member of Compass, which is a progressive think tank, Richard knows it well, which puts me broadly, I guess, on the left. But I've always been somebody who believes in going beyond left and right, because our society, after all, is made up of a vast diversity of people which have only broadly settled into a left and a right, but they're both there. Too often when we think about politics, we're really only thinking about our own piece of the puzzle and somehow managing to exclude the rest. So the last thing I did leave Compass Think Tank recently to go and do another project, which is The Alternative. But the last thing I did before I left was write a paper called Is the Party Over? And I know that Richard and I could be in conversation for hours about this, but I looked at why political parties weren't really serving us anymore. And there are many issues which I won't go into here. But the biggest fact that I came out with that I can't ignore, and none of us can really ignore, is that only 2% of people in the UK are members of political parties. So even with the growth, which I really welcome, of the Labour Party, we're still only at 2%. 2% of people think it's worth their time and effort they're thinking about this on a daily basis, to be involved in politics as we know it. So what does that say? First of all, it says that 2% is the political discourse that we have. So when we're talking about politics, we're talking about this bubble here that 2% of people are really involved in. And our media is pretty codependent with that bubble. So what we read about in politics is around that 2% discourse, right? So when we think of politics, we're thinking about a thing which is not really reflective of our broader society, right? So I've been thinking about this for some time. What is happening in the 98%? Who are this 90? What's this 98%? And from within the political bubble, we look at them as, and I did it for years, the apathetic, the people who don't care as much, the people who want to get on with their own lives. And to some extent, the Conservative Party could claim that it has been able to get into government year after year, time after time, based on this fact. Forget it, people aren't interested. We're just going to, they just want basically the status quo. They want to know everything's going to continue as it is. We're the party for that, right? What's happened, right, over the last 10 years is that we've been in a revolution. Right? Now, some people talk about bring on the revolution, but the truth is we've been in a revolution for 10 years. What is that revolution, you might ask yourself? It's the revolution of information and connectivity that was brought to us by the internet. So over the last 10 years, everything's changed. I mean, it just, it has. The quality of our lives has changed. Now, sometimes that's a good thing. Parts of it are good. We've been able to connect with many other people. We've had access to information. We've had the ability to, be global creatures. We can reach out to people across the world. My own project, Soft Power Network, turned from being a group of, experts into something that was globally connected in a very short space of time because of the internet. So what is that phenomenon, and what should we be doing with that? Our general experience of that has been that it's caused a lot of chaos. So chaos, so now it's politics and chaos, all right? The height of it, I think, of the brokenness of it, and the inadequacy of our political response came for me during Brexit. And in fact, I'd been long interesting myself in a Danish political initiative called The Alternative. And I found myself on an island just outside of Denmark in a political festival on the day that Joe Cox was murdered. And it was a real sense to me of, politics is broken. We're now at this point where the country's so deeply divided, and it's verging on the extreme now. Somebody's died. What is the alternative? And I just committed at that point to starting this new political platform on the basis of that question. What is the alternative? So, we didn't start with another ideology. We didn't say, that was then and this is now. What we have to do is this. Because the real thing that's changed is the dynamics, it's the power dynamics. People in a million different ways have got a sense that they can make a difference to their own lives. They're organizing themselves differently. This feeling, this desire for autonomy is being reflected all over the world. Sometimes in political, what you're talking about, Kim, is a really good example of, people wanting to do things for themselves. Independents are beginning to arise, What you're doing, Ed, is another example of that. You know that there's information and data out there that we need better access to, so you're just going to go and get it, What Richard's talking about the need to engage people in a more playful way that makes them feel they want to be part of this, is something about the changing feel of politics. I mean, there's all these different pieces, but can we give rise to something genuinely different now, which has itself orientated in society, not in Westminster? So it is generally of the people. And this is something that is not, I don't feel it's going to be an overnight project. It's a slow developmental project. What I do feel is that it's not simply about people ticking boxes. So when we say people want more autonomy, there's a lot of things they want more of, right? So I think what George Monbiot is talking about in that book is people need a greater sense of belonging. He's talking about a politics of belonging. Other people, religious groups, and actually I'm not going to cite some of them are good and some of them are bad, but they're talking about people needing more meaning and purpose in their lives. You have an epidemic of depression throughout the Western world. What is it that people are lacking, really, in their daily lives that politics should be able to facilitate, right? The important part of this for us is that, as Kim was saying, we have to turn it upside down. We're no longer living in a world where politicians can offer to provide people with power. We're living in a world in which people are taking power back for themselves. And so what is the politics that can serve that, right? It does require quite a turning around of one's way of being in the world. So one of the things that we do is that we encourage people, when they are becoming active in any way, just stepping up to citizenship, just doing their own initiative, we're saying, okay, wear the badge, I'm a politician, right? You are the politicians now of this 21st century. What is really missing is the kind of party that can lead that. And when I say lead, I'm saying that specifically because as much as we could live in this utopia that I think Pete was pointing at, where people are beginning to take more responsibility for their own lives, still there has to be somebody connecting that to power and the resources that we share across the nation and then across the globe. So somebody has to be, there's still a role for politicians to serve and to connect people to the sources of power and to the globe. So this is, for us, a design process, right? We're in the process of designing a new way that suits these new dynamics. So we do three things specifically. We're not a political party because in this system, first past the post, there really is no point in having a new political party. The good parties will, any new political party gets swallowed up by the system, and we don't have a fair system. They could have 5 million votes on one seat. It just doesn't work in the UK. So until we have proportional voting, we're going to stay as a political platform. What we could do is operate at the local level, as you're saying, help independents find some commonality, maybe share values, maybe get a sense of belonging a little bit across the country. That's something that we might do in the future. But what we're doing at the moment on this political platform is we publish a new media. So every single day, we publish a new initiative or a new piece of the puzzle, right? And if you read this Daily Alternative, if you step outside the political bubble or you step outside the media mainstream and you start to get a sense of what's happening in the 98%, believe me, over a short space of time, you're going to start feeling much better about what's possible because there's so much out there that is happening. Apathy is not the right way to describe the 98%. Ingenious, complex, interesting, motivated, that's the way I would talk about the 98%. Right, so that's one thing we're doing. The second thing we're doing is we're opening political laboratories around the country because we feel that there's no one place that knows how the other places want to behave. So we're opening political laboratories around the country and allowing, on a regional level, people to express themselves. When we think about trying to have, for example, a national identity, it's really difficult in a country like this. What London wants is very different from what Newcastle wants. It's very different from what Cardiff wants. We have to allow some sort of regional identity to arise and empower that. And part of that is really recognizing the slower work of people like Flat Pack Democracy, who are not just ticking boxes, but they are coming together, as Kim, you were describing really well. The autonomy and the political credibility that can give people back control doesn't come through ticking boxes. It comes through developing relationships with each other. It comes through facing difficult questions together. It comes from being able to tolerate each other and notice each other's needs. This is a human development, social development project we're in. If we want a new politics, then we all have to sort of recognize that and invite people to step up for themselves. So, and then the third thing we're doing, which is just to stop on that as a final point, is we're really trying to harness the creativity of people. We feel that creativity should be at the heart of any new politics. It starts maybe with artists, poets, musicians, bringing that into the space and sort of releasing people a little bit and giving them a different feel. You know, we want all of our political events to feel good. You know, politics has to be viscerally different. You know, even this is stretching it. You're sitting around with these microphones and us sitting at a top table. It's not really the feel that we want for politics of the future. And artists might be the people to lead that change. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Absolutely. You know, there's some genius thinking there. I want to introduce passing it over to you by reading a line in this book. So these are these 4 thinkers and many more. Those who promote this story should know what their values are and be able to name them without hesitation or embarrassment. We've really heard that today, haven't we? We've heard these really clear and values-driven ideas. So over to you. What have you got to offer? If speaking in the circle is not your thing, you might want to tweet using the hashtag Campfire Convention. Nobody's going to think you're tweeting home to say what you want for your tea, so feel free to do that. Pose your questions, pose your ideas, but please, to help us build community, say your name. Even if you speak for the second time, say your name again, because it's by those names, isn't it? That's going to encourage us to keep speaking to one another as the day goes on. So over to you. I've got my eyes peeled, but if I'm not noticing, bounce up and down.
Morning. I'm Andy Lambert, a bit of a veteran from Big Chill and everything else. He's been involved with 3 observations. First time Scott was in the Republic of Ireland. So I see a lot of what's dominating the debate here being English politics and English systems. In the Republic of Ireland, where politics is perfect, nonetheless, they have long experience of coalition governments. Scott has also had to learn about. And the highest proportion of independent MPs were in our local county election, the local GP, especially on the poll on our campaign, which came out. So just to point fact, step back, think about the way politics are here. It's very different in lots of other places. I think English are too sort of wrapped up in their own history of other parliaments and all that stuff. Second observation, while we certainly have febrile state of politics at the moment, as Brexit turns into Sexit, and possibly exit over the weekend, these are not that dramatic events. In this country, the general strike, 68 revolution in France, the real revolution in 1917, there's a lot, Civil War in America, there's been lots more dramatic events, so we're going to put some perspective on that. Thirdly, I think more, again, picking up points which you've raised from the panel, this is the area which I think is most thought, is when it comes to working with 98%, you have to be realistic about certain issues. So why have we got Xi or Trump or a number of everyone in power, some of them through elections? Because there's a security drive that tends to swing political votes. And secondly, whether we like it or not, the knowledge distribution about why you should be thinking about things in certain ways is not even. That's a polite way of saying, as we know from the analysis of the Brexit vote, you can see how the educational age profiles were, and it tells a story which is not necessarily a new one. So, when people vote a particular way, particularly if you start to use plebiscites, referendums, and all those drive things, you've got to be very careful about emotions that swing things short term, the level of knowledge, the level of understanding about a particular issue. So it's none of these things are easy solutions. I certainly think that the board will spend some time thinking about the 98% who are not actively involved in political parties as such, it's worth considering that I think the mechanics of it are no more simple than what we're talking about. I think proportional representation might help it. As a party of Liberals, who seem to be the only one who should have that.
Thank you. So your name, sorry, Andy. Andy, thank you very much, Andy. Panel, Richard, did you catch my eye there?
I've just been to Dublin to speak at the conference there. and met.
Quick interjection. Dublin and the rest of Ireland.
Yeah, I know. My grandfather came from County Mayo, so. But it's interesting that you talk about proportional representation, and I think instinctively most of us are in favour of it. But it also divides the left. I mean, you think about Ireland. It was founded by an armed revolution, but it's been long dominated by right-wing parties, and the left has found it very difficult to actually get into the system. And when it's done well, like the Labour Party, it's ended up in going coalition with another right-wing party. So, you say a lot of independents. Well, there are lots of Trotskyists in the Irish Parliament, Doyle there at the moment. But they all seem to. I mean, you have the Irish Labour Party, you have people before profit, you have the militant tendency, you have Greens. I mean, it's shattered into large numbers of the group, and this is the problem. One of the interesting things about our present situation is that lots of people who left the Labour Party are returning to it. It's not just that there's a huge influx of young people, but there's people who've been in groups like this, all sorts, Greens, community activists, traders, who come back into the Labour Party. And one of the advantages of having a mass party is you meet lots of different people from very different backgrounds. I would guess that the class background, or the class fraction, to be honest here, is actually quite narrow. So one of the things I find in my local Labour Party meetings is you meet people who are trade unionists, you meet people from ethnic communities. It's much, much more diverse. And that's always been the case. Actually, I was in the 1980s, these ultra-left groups. If you go to the anarchist book fair, it's almost entirely white. It's quite extraordinary, given that they have it in places like Tottenham or East London. So one of the advantages, it seems to me, is to try and get somewhere where you can get that diversity of groups of people together. And that's what these alternatives, which maybe work at a local level, it's very difficult to scale them up to a national. And yet we have this historic institution that was set up by our ancestors, so we should make use of it. And when it has been used, like the GLC, it's actually managed to push forward progressive politics at the grassroots as well. Because you create an opening and say to people, it's okay to be community. I mean, the good example, I think the best example I know, is that when the GLC was elected, they did not have a single lesbian or gay councillor. So as John McDonnell said, they rang up Gay Switchboard and asked them what to do, because they knew that homophobia was bad because it was dividing the class. And we got all this monstered by the Tory media for it, absolutely monstered. But 30 years later, the Tories passed the Gay Marriage Act. So it shows that if you can create that space and allow people to flow, they can change the world. But you need, part of the solution of this puzzle is you do need the political party that can take state power. I come back to this. In 1874, the International Working Men's Association split between socialists and anarchists. And the anarchists said, no, ignore state power. And the Social Democrats, I think, were being proved correct historically, that we need to engage with this rather boring thing of running the state, to open it up so we don't have to rely on it so much.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Richard.
I like your point, Richard, about the fact that a large organisation brings together people from different backgrounds. But, I mean, it might be argued that a two-party system is inherent in either of our human complexity. So, would you, bearing in mind the obvious overlap with the current Labour Party and small C conservatism, I mean, if you were to detach yourself from your current association with the Labour Party, could you potentially logically foresee expanding that party to be one party or no party?
Well, I think when I tried one of... Can I just answer this?
Okay. Thank you, Mike.
When I tried one of Ed's surveys, it showed I was a member of the Green Party, which I thought was quite interesting. No, I mean, I think, one of the promises in the last election manifesto was a constitutional convention. And I think everybody in this room knows that the political system of this country is broken. I'm just sceptical about trying to build another left party. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Because basically it turns into the Labour Party. The problems of the Labour Party would be faced by, if the Greens did really well and suddenly got 20% of the vote. Look at Germany. They face the same problems. The problem is, how, as radicals, do you engage with entering the political system without becoming part of the political system?
Can I?
So there's in the 1980s, you used to say in and against the state. You can look it up, it's on LibCom. It's a very famous document. It was like, it's that problem. How do you play both? And it's really difficult not to become part of the system that you're trying to reform. Yeah?
Thank you. Thanks, Richard, and thanks, Mike. Indra.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with what Richard's saying there. I mean, there are experiments going on all over Europe right now, and actually also in different parts of the world. In Kenya, I heard about for the first time. Definitely in Bolivia. I mean, these are things that are happening all over the world. Why? Because we're sharing this information and we're aware of new practices and new dynamics that can exist around power. Now, that might sound like very woolly, but it's actually manifesting as new kinds of political parties turning up in different places. So the phenomenon of movements, I think we're all aware that there are movements forming everywhere. You know, Occupy was a massive movement, a global movement, but there are also much smaller movements appearing, you know, around all sorts of different issues, and some of them are political. The relationship between the movement and the party is very hard to get right, because we're still living in the old world of vertical organization, and we're trying to find new models of a more fluid organization, but we haven't got there yet. I mean, with Podemos, for example, in Spain, it's a great movement of people, all based on local circles and people being, local, trying to feed up to a party. Great as a movement, but once it had a party that was actually operating in the old system, the relationship between the movement and the politicians start to break down. What's happening in Denmark? I mean, we're starting because in Denmark they're being as radical as they can be. So the alternative was started by a guy called Uffe Elbæk, who is he's not a career politician. He's a guy who ran an entrepreneurial organization, leadership organization, global one, for 25 years, a bit of a character. He was invited into politics to be the culture minister, and then he jumped ship and started his own party, right? And this party, called The Alternative, started with no ideology, no manifesto. He crowdsourced everything. He said, we're going to just crowdsource a new manifesto because we're trying to champion this idea that you have got good ideas, you know how to run your own lives. And that's what they did. And because it's a proportional system over there, in the first round, he got elected in. He was then an official member of parliament. The second electoral round, they got 9% of the vote. It's the fastest growing party in Denmark, right? And it has a huge youth piece of it. I mean, they're just playing with forms, and it's bloody difficult, I can tell you, to be in Parliament trying to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Indra. I'm going to bring Ed in, and then leave Ed up here. Ed first.
I use vegetables when engage with people, not because recently I came up with the idea that first of all I'll show you.
Give us your name. Natalie, thank you.
This is Boris. Now, he was my first.
Indeed.
For me, it's all about having a laugh. I'm really interested in what you have to say about this. So I met Boris after a referendum. Then shortly after that, I came up with Theresa May's.
Oh, very good.
Yeah. So this is just to show you how it is. And over time, I realised, well, I know what I can do. I can set up a political vegetable shy, but we could throw potatoes. So just really briefly, I mean, anyone might want to have a chat with me, Mike, just not going to talk to me again. It was interesting to me, it was having fun with people and how people responded to that, how many people wanted to eat Trump, how many people wanted to eat Boris. I haven't yet managed to think through in my mind what good that might do for them. So I don't know if it's anything or whether it just allows people to, anyway, I suppose it's a bit like you're doing, throwing some bomb in there and some.
I like to.
Yeah.
I want to know if you eat your vegetables afterwards.
Probably I'll cook them first. I'll probably let them last a day, but I don't know, and you may not want to discuss it because it might be sensible enough, but for me, it kind of did engage people, and I was conscious when I met kids at events, they know exactly who Trump was, and who Theresa May was, and they go, oh, I get the joke, Theresa May. So anyway, I've yet to develop it into a big thing, but I just got any thoughts.
Brilliant. I love that. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you.
I think it's great that anything that engages people with some humour and fun. I mean, you would go down a tree at our new Bournemouth Beacon. And I just think it's anything that you were saying about bringing some fun and music and stuff. And I think anything like that is a great way of bringing people around. I think it's brilliant. I just don't know how you feel when you chop them up afterwards and put them into a soup. Oh, right, okay.
Actually, I did dare myself to go to the Labour conference in Brighton to see what was happening. And that was a new experience I couldn't tell you about. Anyway, a couple of delegates said I was encouraging violence.
What?
Well, they're serious.
I was actually going to make that point, that I think we do have to be, you know, Joe Cox has been mentioned, right? These are human beings, and they have like we're saying, we want people to step up and do the job so that they can be famous and we can throw shit at them, and that we can take them into the newspapers and eviscerate their lives and entirely screw them over as much as we possibly can, because we want to elect psychopaths to do things for us that we won't do on our own, that we can then subsequently hate so we feel good about ourselves. That's brutal. Right? And so the idea of being mean to individuals is not a great idea. But it is Guy Fawkes weekend, right?
I think I am.
But
I don't actually want to do violence, and I agree with a lot of what you were saying about it's about human relations. And I added bits of psychotherapy coming into it, how we relate to people. So I'm not encouraging violence at all. But I wonder whether there's something that people can do by proxy, in aiming a potato or something. What if there's, I have to ask you,
Yeah.
I ask this myself.
I would definitely echo the thing around anything that you can do to engage people is great. You know, the Corbyn Run thing, like, you know, you've engaged people in a new way in a game, in a thing, in a participating. Even hell, just even knowing who Boris Johnson is and that you might want to hate him is quite a useful bit, right, for an awful lot of people. But I think then subsequently there is a responsibility to just be careful and sensitive to some of the issues around it. You know, some of the implications of Corbyn Run. It's not cabinet run. It's not a whole bunch of intelligent people work together and do cool stuff.
True. That's not true.
Oh, is it not? Sorry,
You've
I
not
never actually
played
played it. I saw them developing it. I was speaking with them whilst they were doing it.
No.
Okay. In that case, great example of using a hook and bringing in other people and showing more complexity through it as the game develops. Yes.
I could just say 2 points about this. Is first, we based it on a game called Fiscal Combat by Jean-Luc Mélenchon, and as the name suggests, he goes and beats people up to get their money off the rich, basically, the go list and so on. So the first thing we did was get rid of the violence. Jeremy just chases them, and when he reaches them, they give him their money. Yeah. So that was the first thing. The second thing is that we thought, well, it was interesting. It wasn't just me; it was other people said it's just the one man, Mélenchon, against the enemy. So the next thing we did when we acted was to say every time you got to a certain amount of money, you unleashed a campaign pledge, which then brought on a whole crowd of people following you. And we didn't have enough time, but one of the things we're going to do another version, but what we want to do is be able to not just say substitute Jeremy for John or Diane or whoever else your favourite shadow cat, but actually to take it, you can do this, there's a piece of software that makes your face into a cartoon, so you can be the leader. We only had 3.5 weeks, so we didn't have time to implement this idea. But maybe we'll make you give a donation to keep us going for that little trick.
Thank you. I'm going to bring Kim in now, and then I'm sure we've got someone else in there.
I'm very interested in what you're talking about violence and violent language and all of that kind of thing. I'm not suggesting that. I see that as fun and entertaining. But when you're talking about politicians as people, that does interest me. And I was thinking about Theresa May, not the most popular of people at the moment. But if you take Theresa May as a person, and I'm interested also about truth and ego. We find it very hard to talk about truth for fearing of being judged, and particularly in politicians, they're out to impress and to say things that they think people want to hear. Now, if Theresa May or any other politician was really to speak from their heart and to speak truthfully, you could imagine almost, me being a dreamer, of Theresa May getting up and saying, look guys, I know I'm really unpopular at the moment, but I've got this job to do, and I'm really out of my depth, and I'd like to know how we could go about doing it. Can anyone help? If you start to change that, and I know that is a bit far-fetched, but it brings me to the point of people speaking about honestly and truthfully about what we're doing. If our politicians spoke the truth, and if we had people who were not afraid to say, actually, I don't really know what to do, I think that it would be a much kinder and better way, because your other opposing side is less likely to attack you if you say, actually, I really don't know what I'm doing. I really feel I'm very unpopular. I didn't really sleep last night, and I don't really know what I'm doing. People are much more likely to gather around and help, and I think that's also very important in politics, in new politics, to have politicians and people who will speak truthfully, and I don't just mean truth about what's going on, but truth about how they feel, truthfully about what they're doing, because as Ed says, they are people too.
Thanks, Kim. That's a really different concept of leadership you've introduced to us there. Thank you.
I guess it's
Name?
become at the start about having more female community thinking in politics, and I think there's something you're saying there which is about changing our idea about what strength is. So the idea that strength is actually going to come from a collective process and not from a strong individual leadership, which is always going to come up against the challenges of what's truth and what's false. You can't, the reason that line doesn't exist, it's always more complex than that. So I think we have to, a big part of this for me is like, how do you start to rearrange those perceptions of strengths and the only answer that if you actually is that question is that, well, that whole thing about unity and division and strength is only going to come from the community that you're talking about, and a challenge to the idea of strong, largely male ideas about what leadership is. I don't know what question.
What's your name?
Mads.
Mads, thank you so much. Thanks for that. Anyone want to respond to that?
Well, I mean, I'm also quite happy to hear more from the.
That's great.
Other than to say yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant.
Hi, my name is John from Navy. Last Tuesday there was the social session with Chris Williamson. I don't actually live in the UK, so I'm not as familiar with UK politics that I read. I asked him a question about whether you can imagine a different kind of organization or module for determining the best policies using experts input and maybe algorithms. And his reply was he didn't want to see more of a technocracy, he wanted more of people-powered politics. But right now actually there's a conference going on, a global conference going on in London with the effective altruism community, which is a group of many young people who are trying to combine the head and the heart. So there's a very strong sense of doing the most good possible for the world, but using the best evidence-based solutions based on research, based on what's been observed, based on what actually works. And so my question is, can we imagine trying to make decision-making more transparent, where politicians play more of a role of talking from the heart, but being able to show how decisions are actually made. Almost perhaps even establishing a separate non-partisan institution that can do proper fact-checking and give people confidence that policies are based on real solid evidence. So it is in some ways a bit of a technocratic solution, but it's not one or the other. It's that plus there's an ethical base that underlies it all. It is all coming from the heart, but there's also this confidence based on having an independent institution. I'm just wondering how that would tie in with some of your ideas for how we can move forward.
I'm going to ask Ed and then Indra, if that's okay.
I think that's a really good point and set of ideas. I think one of the key things about better decision making is actually slowing down decision making. And I'm going to pull in a point that I was going to make about proportional representation earlier on, that New Zealand brought in proportional representation like 17 years ago or something, and they had a referendum on it. They had 4 separate votes. First one, do we care enough about proportional representation to have the next 3 votes? If we do, we will then have a Royal Commission, we'll analyse the different ways of doing the voting maths, and we'll make a recommendation, and then we can choose which way to vote on, which math system to vote on. So first one, let's have more votes. Second one, which one of these math systems do you want to use? The people said we want MMR as opposed to STB, which was the official recommendation. Cool. Third vote, do you want to go ahead and have proportional representation under MMR system? People voted yes, but before they did the third vote, know that there will be a 4th vote in 15 years' time where we can roll it back if it all goes horribly wrong. And then 15 years later, they also voted yes. And so you have this very elongated period to inform, discuss, consider, reflect, and then experiment. And then, so you understand the popularity of it, you understand the detail of it, you understand the implications of it, and then you test it, and then you can roll it back again. That's awesome. That's good decision making. That's putting evidence above ideology. It's allowing people to participate. Matt, you want to come in? I don't know. Sorry, that would be a good stat to be able to throw in.
Wikipedia.
And so being able to have such similar systems as well, because I think partly why we don't have these things, we don't have much more engagement, is that people are frightened of what people think. You know, there's the whole, we'll bring back hanging thing. Like, yeah, we might say that in version 1, because that's like, it's the only question you're asking me, and that is my only way to represent that I would like a stronger judicial system, a stronger process of justice. Like, but ask me 10 more questions about that, and I will give you much more detail and hold that mirror up to us and go, oh, we are a bunch of psychotic arseholes. You know, we will moderate our position on that one, right? And we will learn from that. But at the moment, we have no idea, and so we go with this blended. There are a lot of people who voted Brexit because they wanted to send a signal, and then didn't realise how strong that signal would be. And, so. That's the main thing that I wanted to say on that. I think there are all sorts of ways in which you could bring that in quite nicely. One of them is the recommendation of the Digital Democracy Commission, which is a citizens' advisory parliament, and whereby it's the system that I spoke about earlier in my intro, was that you basically take the simplified version of the bills going through parliament, ask people to vote on them and see what they think, and so you have that deliberative chamber, but it's a sandbox. It's decoupled from anything. It's just there. You don't have to participate in it. It doesn't actually go anywhere, but it's nonetheless going to be an informative process for those who want to play within that space and learn what the problems and ideas and solutions might be.
I like these two questions coming out together, because I think they're both parts of a shift that we are going to be seeing. And I think it's always tricky to talk about masculine and feminine. And I'm going just to let myself do that for a minute, because instead of male, female, I think masculine and feminine is fair enough, because, you know, women have masculine and men have feminine, so we're allowed to sort of, it's a bit fuzzier. But the sort of shift, for example, from, let's say, hard power to soft power as ways of operating, right? Hard power is more about using force, soft power is more about using influence and attraction. Different, but they're both power. You know, it's a different way of moving through the space, and I think that is a sort of move from masculine to feminine. But also just the language of like change. You know, can we change the system? Always suggest that we're going to forcibly go from this to this. You know, from first past the post to proportional representation. What you've just described is a developmental way of doing that. So instead of using the word change, I really like the word development. Let's develop this idea until we get to an agreement that we all like. For me, that's a more feminine way of operating in the public space. So I think there is elements of that, definitely, and it may be coincident with more women being in the public space, you know, than in the past. Maybe the feminine voice maybe was more in the private space. Now it's all become public space, so there's more influence. In fact, if you want to look at the global problems, we should be spending it in Africa doing this, right? This is like what our data tells us. Actually, to affect the bigger picture and to really cause global change, this is where we should be spending our money. That's really challenging for people to take on, but it's requiring big picture thinking, and it comes directly out of data. And I think these two things can work really well together if it's based on a developmental idea rather than a change idea. Yeah.
Thank you. We've got 8 minutes left. I'm just checking. I've seen Mags's hand there. Just checking. I will take from here because we've not heard from you. Thank you. Say your name, please. Hi, Josh.
About young people voting, obviously you all know that in the Scottish referendum, 16, 17 were allowed to vote, and they heavily shaped the outcome of the election. They weren't allowed to vote in the referendum, the EU referendum, and it could have had a big impact yet. So I want your thoughts on, do you think that 16, 17 had them vote, and if so, how likely should it be that it gets passed in Parliament very soon?
Could I ask for a succinct answer from all the panel members, please, if I start with you, Richard?
Yes. I think it's actually, well, certainly for the Labour leadership, it's our policy. I mean, it's not just more young people are more likely to vote Labour than Tory. No, that's pretty obvious. I think it's also to do with actually engaging people at an appropriate age with politics. I mean, if you think about it, if you have your first vote at 16, particularly if it's in a sort of school peer group, so you get used to voting. Yeah, a lot of people disengage when they leave their parents' home and start moving around a lot. That would also be a good way. You know, if you have regular elections, we're almost getting annual elections in this country, which is what the Levellers demanded in 1647. Is to make. I don't think it's just getting 16, 17. Also, we should have a holiday when it's election time with celebrations. It's a city. It's not just your duty as a citizen to vote. It should be a thing of pleasure to vote. Yeah, it's a way that you mark your involvement in the political system. It should be more than voting. But if we don't even celebrate the act of voting, what does it say about how we want people to be engaged in politics in general?
Thank you very much, Kim.
I love your idea of having a party to vote, not a political party, but a party to vote.
Party.
I think it's. I think that's a really good idea. I don't really know where I stand on the 16. I sway between whether it's a sensible idea or not. But from the young people that I've met, I think that they're a lot more informed and a lot more passionate. And at the moment, I do believe the change is going to come from the young people. I also believe very powerfully that the new generation is always better than the last. And certainly that's my experience. And I think, so I suppose we're going to make a decision today, say yes.
Thank you, Kim. Ed?
I think it'd be a great idea. Unfortunately, it just got voted down in Parliament yesterday because it was slightly blocked. Yeah,
they didn't vote it. That's the whole point.
Because the Tories kind of blocked it.
Talked it out.
I would actually go further and just say, well, look at all the cool things that we could do with voting if we had more advanced ways of voting. Could we, for example, say that the weight of your vote is relative to your life expectancy, or multiplied by the amount of experience? Now, I mean, we sort of laugh at that, right? But by the time the Brexit negotiations have concluded, i.e. this next summer, the demographics, there will be enough dead people and enough young people to make the vote have swung the other way. So by the time the thing even gets to be a real thing, it's already wrong. It's already not what the majority wanted. So actually, there's merit to the idea. It's contentious, but Hey.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Indra.
I mean, me personally, but just generally, on this political platform, very, very pro a young person's vision of the future. I mean, we feel that young people are bringing into the social space wiring and thinking and understanding that the generations that are currently in power simply don't have. So definitely want to empower the young people politically and socially, absolutely. I suppose I'm a little nervous about, and my heart quakes at the way in the current politics they're just going to be divided between two camps. And I see this a lot at schools. I'm a school governor. When it comes to the elections, they have to choose between this or that. And it actually distorts their real political possibilities, and they get hijacked by, by really crude ideas that, that put them off politics, actually. So I'm nervous from that point of view. I'd love to catapult us into a future where they could really be shaping the future more without having to be hijacked by the current politics. But, can't have it always.
My 4-year-old loved canvassing in the election.
Yeah.
A very good vote winner.
Unless it's on this point, I feel that we've got 2 minutes to go, and I'd rather not set hairs running. A time for a succinct point, and that's about it. Could you give us your name, please? All right, thank you. Thank you. People are starting to, I think, get ready for a comfort break. So I'm going to close it here. Thanks for that question, Josh. It was a great place to end. To say massive thanks to everybody, whether you spoke, tweeted or not. What I felt in the room was really superb, attention for one another, and that's really great. We could never have enough time. But I'd like you to put your hands together, please, for our panel members and applause.